Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name's Kim. Today I'm going to be talking about some books that I read in May and June. One of the first books that I finished up at the start of May was The Riddle of the Labyrinth by Margalit. So this is a non-fiction book about the decipherment of a text called Linear B. So Linear B was, like I say, this kind of unknown script that was found on Crete at a place called Knossos. Hundreds of these tablets were found kind of in the remains of this old palace that was dug up. And this book talks about three different people that are key to the decipherment of this text. So the first person who is discussed in this book is Arthur Evans, and he was the architect who kind of organised the dig of the palace and found all of these tablets and things like that. And so the first story kind of talks about his life and talks about what they found at this site, etc., which is very interesting. Margalit also kind of takes time to discuss with you how different texts are written and how you can kind of start to decipher texts that you don't know, and the different types of texts that there are. So I found that really, really interesting. I was trying to do a close-up shot, but they talk about different kinds of writing that there can be. Some nations write left to right, some write right to left, and then you've got like an example in this book. The letters are kind of written in reverse on every other line, so you write left to right one way and then right to left on the next line, and so on, so on. And then there's also texts that have been written where every other line is written upside down, which I just thought was really fascinating fact. And also discusses like the difficulties of trying to decipher a text where you don't know the language that it's written in and you don't know the writing that it's written, the actual script. You don't know anything about it, and it's basically starting from scratch. And so that's where the second part comes in, which is about Alice Kober. So Alice Kober was a New York classicist, and she basically did so much work towards deciphering these texts. There was lots of romanticising by other classicists about what language Linear B could be, but she was very adamant in that she wasn't going to try and pick one. She was just going to systematically work through and catalogue all the different symbols and try and work out the patterns, and using knowledge of the way language works and how endings change depending on different types of language and things like that. So Alice basically built up this huge amount of data from looking at these symbols and trying to work out what language it was, basically. What this book does is highlight Alice Kober's efforts, because Alice actually passed away before Linear B was fully deciphered, and a lot of her work just kind of got brushed aside, and it's important to highlight and recognise the work that she did towards deciphering the text, which sounds like hasn't really been done before with respect to this story. But yeah, it's quite sad really, because not only did Alice pass away before the texts were deciphered, but also in her last kind of few years she was kind of roped into writing up other people's papers on this kind of work, and was kind of treated a bit like a secretary, which I didn't really appreciate. And because I obviously knew that she wasn't going to survive for very much longer, I was frustrated for her to read that all this time seemed like such wasted time, which was such a shame. And then finally the third section is about Michael Ventris, who deciphered the text in the end. Michael Ventris was from London and he was an architect, but he got obsessed with Linear B and wanting to decipher the text, so it was like a pastime. But then I think he ended up quitting his job, from what I remember rightly. It was quite a long time ago that I read it, and then he ended up deciphering it, but he used a lot of Alice Kober's like initial findings for his work. But I think it was only a few years after she passed away that he managed to decipher the text, so that was a real shame that she didn't get to live to see that. Then the second book I finished in May was Aliens, which is edited by Jim Al-Khalili, and I'm not going to talk too much about this because I made a whole video where I talk about all the different science that's discussed in this book. This book is kind of a collection of lots of different writings by different scientists, and in my video I speak about exactly what subjects were discussed, specifically the sciencey ones rather than the more traditional kind of alien topics of people being abducted. I kind of ignored that. That wasn't mentioned too much in this book anyway, but there are chapters on that. But yes, so if you're interested in that, I'll leave that down below in the description, and there I just talk about the science that's discussed in this book, and then I also discuss other books that I have found that I want to read in the future because of topics discussed in this book. So then I read the memoir of Reinaldo Arenas, Before Night Falls. I always say Before the Night Falls, that's not what it is, Before Night Falls. And I'm going to talk more in detail about this book. I've got lots of tabs in this book. When I do my Cuba wrap-up, I'm doing a Reading Around the World challenge, very, very slow Reading Around the World challenge, but I kind of like to savour the books, to be honest, and have a really good think about them. Yeah, so I'm going to talk more in detail in my Cuba wrap-up about this, but generally I enjoyed this read. It was a really hard read in a lot of places. It's very graphic, like sexually graphic at times, and it was difficult to read because of how Reinaldo Arenas was treated by the Castro regime in Cuba, because he was a writer, and how he was treated because he was a homosexual, and well, basically how homosexuals were treated. But I'm really glad that I read this, because I think even though I did find it quite difficult to read, it really was an eye-opening read, and I think an important one. But like I say, I will talk in more depth in my Cuba wrap-up, so check that out when it comes out if you want to. So those were the books that I finished in May, and then on to June. I finished up very quickly, right at the start of June. I finished Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is book 2 in the Farseer trilogy. The first one is Assassin's Apprentice, and yeah, I absolutely loved this book so much. Like, this series begins with this little boy who gets taken by his grandfather to the royal family and basically left and said, this is the king-in-waiting's illegitimate son, so I don't want to look after him anymore, you have to look after him. And then the boy is taken to the keep, and where the royal family live, and his real father has abdicated from being king-in-waiting and gone, and you basically follow this little boy's life growing up in the keep and the way he's treated as someone who is kind of in the royal family but also kind of an outsider as well. This is the first adult fantasy book that I've really read, and I really like it a lot. This book just ended on like such a... It wasn't a high. I was going to say that this book ended on a high. If you read this book, it doesn't end on a high, but oh my gosh, the stakes are just completely raised, and like something happens at the end which was shocking, at least to me. It's a very absorbing book, very realistic, and can completely take you away from reality of the world, which is sometimes needed, even though I will say this is just as bleak as the real world. If no, that's not true. This is more bleak than the real world. So beware of that. If you want a book to cheer you up, this is not the one. Then I finished The Binding by Bridget Collins. And this book was a lot different to how I thought it was going to be. So this book kind of has 3 different parts to it, and they're 3 quite different parts. Can't really say too much more than that, but the first part starts off very dark and pretty gothic in its writing style, and kind of slow, and in a way I found it a bit frustrating because I'm like, what is going on? There's lots of questions, but the pacing was it was a bit of a slog to get through at the beginning. It was pretty creepy, and I'm not really into that kind of creepy book, so I was a little bit put off at the beginning, but I was reading it for my friends and family book club, so I had to carry on reading it anyway if I didn't have a choice. So this book follows a guy called Emmett. Emmett, at the beginning of this book, is really poorly, and you don't know why, like you don't know what's wrong with him, but there's something wrong with him, and his family are very odd towards him. So memories can be bound into books in this story, and so that premise is very interesting, and actually this book discusses the different ways that can be used, which I really kind of enjoyed, because at the beginning I thought very narrow-mindedly about why you would need to have these memories bound. And so as the story goes on, you discover more reasons why and how you could bind memories, sorry. And so right at the beginning, Emmett's family is written to by a binder, somebody who binds books, and requests Emmett to come and be her apprentice. And the family just have complete disgust for this person, and they don't want him to go, but then equally they seem to just want him to leave as well. So they send him to this woman to become her apprentice, and then that's kind of how the story begins. So Emmett goes to this binder and this house that he goes to is proper creepy, and it's just her and him. And yeah, so you slowly begin to learn about the trade of bookbinding. So that's really interesting. I will say about this book, what I found was something that's mentioned in the blurb doesn't happen until a third of the way through, which I think is mean when you've invested like over 100 pages into a book and then it kind of something happens and then that's basically what I said on the back. It's kind of dissatisfying in a way. But on the other hand, there's a lot more to the story than that one thing. So, you know, that is the only thing that's kind of spoiled, and then you can carry on with the story. And actually the story changes vibe quite dramatically after that point. So yeah, I don't know. So I'm not going to say it here. And if you are interested in reading the book, I would just say deter from reading the blurb. Overall, I did enjoy it a lot. There was mixed reviews at my book club, my friends and family book club, I will say. But very briefly, part one was kind of creepy, kind of put me off. I wasn't sure if I was going to like the book because of the vibe and how slow paced it was. Part two, I really enjoyed. Change of pace was good and everything became a lot more interesting. And part three changed things up again, and although I didn't like it as much as part two, I was well invested into the characters by then and enjoyed it, and I was really like eager to get to the end to find out what happened. So overall I would like it. I haven't talked about any stars for anything else, but I will tell you that I gave this like 3.5 to 4 stars. Then the next thing that happened was that I DNF'd a book. I DNF'd in 5 years. Basically, I had a real kind of problem with this book right from the start. This book is basically about this woman who gets engaged to her boyfriend of a couple of years, and she has this 5-year plan and everything's planned out and she's very to the book. Then after she gets engaged, she has this dream, and in this dream she's with another man and she's engaged to this other man. And then she wakes up and she's back in present day, and I was thinking it would be really interesting to see how she dealt with that from seeing this flash of another life. But that's not really what the book is, but the way it was done disappointed me. I will just say this, like, she goes to a therapist and says about this dream and what happened and how it made her feel. And she says, you know, but it's just a dream, so it probably doesn't mean anything. And her therapist says to her, oh, well, you never know. Strange things happen. It could have been a premonition, basically. And I was like, wait, what? This is ridiculous. Like, based on what? Like, nothing. It's just, it felt real to her, but who says that it's real? Anyway, so the story goes on from there. And then something happens in the book, and I think that's the part of the book that lots of people enjoy when I've been reading reviews. And it says on the actual thing when you buy it, like, it's a sad book. The book is not your typical romance. It's sad. But the thing that happened is I just couldn't take it. I didn't want to read it. I wasn't invested into like the beginning bit with the dream. It just kind of irritated me. And then things took a turn and I just didn't fancy reading it. I didn't want to be sad. So I just DNF'd it in the end. I DNF'd it at 60%. But I did read the last 3 chapters backwards. I like read the last chapter and then I read the second to last chapter. I mean, I've never done that before, but I wanted to know how it ended, even though I couldn't face reading the rest of it. It didn't make me want to pick it up and read the in-between bits, so I think that says everything. Okay, so finally, the last book that I finished in June is As She Climbed Across the Table by Johnathan Lethem. I've just realised that I'm ending this video on a massively low point because I truly hated this book. I truly hated this book, and I don't think I've read anything this year that I've hated. I gave this 1 star. I hated it. Okay, that's enough hate. So this book shocked me quite a few times. The first shock was that this book is written from the perspective of a man and not the perspective of a female scientist. So I did read the blurb when I talked about the fact I was going to read this for my TBR game. And it's about this guy called Philip Enstrung who is in love with a girl called Alice. And Alice becomes very obsessed with this scientific experiment that's going on at the university that they both work at. And she becomes obsessed with this, and then he is losing her to this experiment. So he's, you know, he's in love with her, vying for her attention, but all her attention is going to this experiment. basically, is the premise. But for some reason I thought that this was going to be from the perspective of the female scientist, but it wasn't. It was from the perspective of Philip. The second thing that shocked me about this book was that even though this is about physics, the physics is a bit too out there for me. It was a bit too unphysicsy, a bit too sci-fi, which was fun to think about, and actually, like, that part of the story was fine. It was kind of a ridiculous thing, but then it's kind of a fun thing to think about, like, if this did happen, then what about this, this, and this? I don't know if that's a shock, but that's just something that was different to what I expected. And then the third thing that shocked me about this book was the insane arrogance of Philip. Like, I was reading some of the reviews on Goodreads afterwards, or during while I was reading this, because you know when you read something that you really hate and then you think, surely other people must agree with me, because I can't be the only person to think this. So I went seeking out people to validate my opinions. But what I found was, people said that this book was some people said this book was kind of like tongue-in-cheek and humorous and, you know, a Mickey take of university life, which I could see, but the way it was executed was just too arrogant for words. Like, Philip, it starts off with basically there's this big scientific experiment that's happening and it's a huge deal. Basically, this other universe is being created. So there's a scientist that works with Alice who has managed to create another Big Bang inside his lab. And so this other universe that's attached to his lab is being bubbled up alongside our universe, but kind of overlapping in a way that we can't actually physically touch. That's kind of what's going on. And it starts when all the scientists, and there's this big huge deal, kind of waiting for this bubble to detach or something, or something to happen to the experiment that I didn't really quite understand. And so Alice is in the room where this is happening, and obviously this is like a huge thing that's happening in science that would probably be like huge worldwide news and just amazing, amazing science. A whole other universe is being made, like that's insane. And so she's watching, and then Philip comes in and straight away is like arms around her, like trying to like grab her attention away, making innuendos to her, like behind, trying to like claw her attention back. And that's basically the whole book, is him struggling for her attention, like when she's doing something important, which was aggravating enough to read about, or saving the day, or like he swoops in several times in this book and saves the day because, you know, he just knows exactly what to say. She gives a press conference and he stands up to ask a question, or he stands up and she thinks he wants to ask a question. So, and he comes out with this just most obnoxious rubbish. And oh my god, he just made me angrier and angrier and angrier. And also, like, at parts in this book is just blatantly offensive to various people at different times. I think about 50 pages into this book, I thought, surely this book has to have been written not recently, because of just the way it's written just sounds dated and just sounds arrogant. And sure enough, this book was written in 1997. That makes me think that it wasn't all completely jokes or irony that I didn't get, or like tongue-in-cheek that was like, are we supposed to not like the character? Is he supposed to be this obnoxious person? But then why does he have so many wins? I don't get it. Like, am I just too stupid to not see between the lines and to understand that we're laughing at him? Because if we're not laughing at the main character and we're laughing at the other characters with the main characters, then that's horrible, because the main character is horrible. Yeah, so overall, didn't like it. Wouldn't recommend. Okay guys, I'm really sorry that I finished on such a bummer, but I read some other really good books in there as well, so hopefully you guys have seen something that you like the look of. I hope everyone is doing well, and I look forward to chatting to you down in the comments. Take care guys, bye.